All right, welcome, folks. Really excited to host another webinar here with you all. We're just going to give a few seconds for everyone to trickle in the webinar virtual door. We did have a tremendous amount of people register today, so we're excited to have a full house joining us on this really exciting conversation around a legal AI playbook for in-house teams. I'm sure this is a topic that many of you talking about, thinking about, maybe implementing already. Would love to also get some engagement throughout this session in the chat. If you're comfortable, maybe you can share some of your playbooks and stories. And of course, questions are always welcome throughout. You can use the Q&A box down below or just pump it into the chat and we'll pick it up from there and incorporate it throughout. So don't wait till the end. If you have questions that pop into your mind throughout, put it into the chat and we'll try and incorporate it into the conversation to keep it as interactive as possible. All right, I see that we've hit triple digits already, still ticking up, but I might get started with introductions. So everyone, if you've never met me before, my name is Evan Wong. I am the co-founder and CEO of Checkbox. We are an AI legal front door and workflow automation platform. So think about whenever any person in the business needs to come to legal, we are the intake tool that allows you to sort things from Slack, Salesforce, email, and bring it right into the legal department for self-service, workflows, or to create matters automatically in the background. That's what we do. I also have two guests today from two organizations that work very closely with us. I'm very excited to have Jen from Elastic and Caitlin from Ivo. I might actually hand over to Caitlin to introduce herself and Ivo as well. By the way, I think we have today, just for Jen and Caitlin here, I think we have people who are Ivo customers and Checkbox customers because there's good overlap. There's also Ivo customers that are not Checkbox customers, so maybe they have no idea what we do. And then the inverse, like Checkbox customers here that may not know what Ivo does. So maybe start from the very beginning here, Caitlin. What does Ivo do, and yourself
Yeah,
as well?
absolutely. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Caitlin. I'm our in-house counsel here at Ivo. We are a legal AI startup. We specialize in contract review tool, and we also we have an entire contract intelligence new product that's like sort of like becoming our specialty. And we really are here to support like contracting teams. My background, of course, is doing contracts, and so we have an amazing team of lawyers here that work directly with our customers to build out their legal playbooks and to help like fit AI right into their existing workflows, so that they're able to see like the benefits of AI without too much of an interruption in implementing it. So nice to be here and looking forward to answering questions and chatting.
Amazing. And then, of course, we have Jen Lenander. Jen is a customer of both Ivo and Checkbox. And today we'll kind of share a lot about how the two have come together, how like AI meets workflow, and probably some of the learnings along the way as well. So, Jen, I'm going to hand over to you for a second to introduce yourself, Elastic, and sort of the legal operations practice there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jen Lenander, I'm the Senior Director of Legal Operations and serve as the Chief of Staff to our CLO. I've been in legal ops longer than maybe I'll ever admit. So, but been doing this a while. I would say, when I think about legal operations, and people have probably heard me say this before, but I really like to think about how do we work smarter, not harder, right? And I think that's when I think about Ivo and I think about Checkbox and a lot of other legal technology, that's really what this is about. And so Elastic is a technology company, and we start with data, right? And so we're taking unstructured data and making sense of it for our customers. And I think, we'll get into this a little bit more, but I think it's a really good base. And I feel like I have a cheat code to when I look at AI technology, because I think the most important thing about AI technology is to understand the data that it's rooted in. And I'm really excited to talk about that today because I think it's so important and something that sometimes gets missed. Like we get all excited about the bells and whistles and we forget about the underlying aspects of how the technology runs. And I think it's a risk, right, that we think about as lawyers, and we should be thinking about a little bit more.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this is going to be a great conversation. I think, the world has changed a lot in the last few months. I think 2026 is a continuation of the AI conversation, but I think we all know it looks different. 24, 25, it was a lot like, oh, AI is here, let's experiment, let's see what we can do with it. I think 26 now is about how do we actually put it into operations, not just to have ChatGPT or Claude on the side, but truly integrated into the actual workflows of work, and thinking about a more AI first approach to solving problems. So with that, I think a lot of interest probably from the audience today is how do we go from the intention and the mandates that might be coming down from leadership into actually business impact, adding technology implementations. And so maybe to kind of ground us, Jen, we always know that best practice doesn't start with the solution. It doesn't start with AI. That's just, the most modern way of solving problems. But you start with the problem. So for you, what were the maybe operational pain points that you were observing within Elastic that had you come out and look at tools?
Yeah, I think to me it's the basic one. I think it's the same as everybody is intake. It's that front door. How do requests come in? Because I think that a lot of times it's a black hole. And you don't really understand one, where they're coming in from, but two, how they're coming in. And then it's so then that causes a metric gap, right? You can't accurately report on volume, velocity, capacity of people. You don't have an idea of what requests are outliers, right? And so like how do you even tackle that? And so I think that's a problem. Like intake is a problem, but how do you solve for it? And I think there's so many ways, and how we solved for it last year, I think is going to be completely different than how we solve for it today and even 3 months from now. But I think that's really what I was looking at. My objective was really to understand like what is how do I solve for centralization, and predictability in many ways, right? And so that was really what got me started in trying to figure out, okay, what path do I want to go on? What technology can help me solve those issues?
Yeah, it makes sense. Like it's somewhat poetic in the sense of like where you start is intake, where legal requests start. Like that's where it originates, and if you can tackle it right at the start, then you have all these trickle down waterfall effects of better data for AI tools like Ivo, right, and better visibility because you take it at the holistic level as opposed to a sub level. So there is quite a lot of value in solving it at the very tippity top of where legal requests originate. Um, and then, like, tell me a bit about how that pursuit of better intake then led you into, like, your work with like specific use cases. I know you have use cases specifically in contracting. Obviously, that's also what our friends at Ivo do. How did you go from intake to contracting?
Yeah, so I think when I thought about intake, there was two, I would say, main use cases, and very different, right? So one was NDA, which I would consider like the high volume, the low risk
Mm,
use case, and really wanted to start there because NDAs are the bread and butter of tech companies, right? You don't really get anywhere without an NDA, but the risk of them is low, and so we really wanted to solve for that. But then if I step out of contracting a little bit, the other part of that is COI, which is like high complexity and high friction, but like but easily solvable with a good intake tool. And so really wanted to go down that path. And I think and I know this isn't part of your question, but I'm just going to talk anyway because that's what you
yeah,
and I do. I feel like um
100%.
is it really forced us. And I think when you do intake or you do any kind of like implementation or automation, it forces you to really understand your process. And I think
Mm,
that's what's so interesting, right? Because even when we decided to work with Checkbox, I was like, yeah, I've got 20 different like workflows that are ready to go. But really, once you get into them and really like dig into it, you realize like there's so much discovery here that we need to understand to fully, truly automate this and to not be lazy about it, right? And I think
yeah.
all of that flows through. And so if I go back to just, I'll talk about our NBA flow just a little bit more, right? So one of the things that we really wanted to do was to make it a little bit more self-serve because it was taking up so much time. And so there's two aspects to that. I think it's the intake of how do you get the request in, and can you get to a point in your risk profile where you let the customer make some choices without legal ever having to review it, which is one direction we went. But then if it does come in, let's say that they're like, no, I want to use customer paper, we want to use third party paper. Great. You know what? That's fine. We'll solve that in the review standpoint, right? And that's where we brought Ivo in to be able to say, okay, let's make this review much quicker so that our attorneys aren't having to really read through everything.
Mm,
And I think that's, for us, I think that works. I think, again, there's no perfect like secret sauce. to how to solve this, right? I think this is what we're doing at Elastic, and I think it's working pretty well. And we'll always continue to iterate on it and make it better as time goes on.
Yeah, makes sense. I feel like it's also one of those things where once you start to get the technology through the door and you solve that first use case, you then, both you and the business start to identify the art of the possible.
Oh.
And then, it's sometimes you do need to have a little bit of the solution to get to the other problems and the buy-in from the rest of the business, and it kind of snowballs and grows from there. So that makes sense. Um,
I think
Caitlin,
it's a little
oh,
dangerous if I'm being honest. Sorry. Like
yeah, yeah.
we've done so well at solving some of those problems that now I have other departments knocking at my door. Can you build this for us in Checkbox? Can you build it? I'm like, like go talk to your team, right? Like, but it's cool. It's really cool to show that legal's solving problems not only for legal, but for other functions within the company. I think there's a lot of value to that because then legal's seen as a partner and not just legal, right? Not just the red tape department.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's also uh, the choice of use cases sometimes can create more what do you call it? Like exposure to the rest of the business around the
Mhm.
value that legal
Yeah.
is delivering, right? Because when you talk about some of these use cases like intake, that's actually a legal problem, but a business facing problem.
Mhm.
And so when you
Yeah.
deploy improvements on that front, actually it's the sales department and your marketing and your HR and your compliance that actually see, oh, legal actually is solving problems and providing new ways of interacting that we could probably benefit
Mhm.
from. And it's always
Absolutely.
it's that outwards sort of brand that happens as you solve these kind of very visible problems. Caitlin, I've got a question for you as well. I know that you've spent a lot of time working with a lot of different legal teams adopting AI. What do you think differentiates the teams that successfully operationalize AI and the ones that are stuck in experimentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously I have a million thoughts on this. But I think like some of my like bigger like immediate thoughts, like teams who are like obviously AI is this new frontier and none of us started our careers out with AI, so there's always going to be this resistance to adopting technology that's scary and that everyone feels like is going to replace us. I think like moving away from that mindset and like you're saying, like figure out the problem you're trying to solve, and like if it's a workflow issue, like figure out a way to like weave it in, and like it's not, I don't think the place to focus is like whether or not it's going to replace us. It's like who's adopting it best, and like if not, you're going to be left behind by like how the legal industry is moving forward. I like my previous role was as outside counsel, and so I know exactly the sort of work that gets outsourced. And then now I'm seeing basically legal teams be able to like bring that in house. So I think it's like legal teams willing to like like shift how the work maybe traditionally looks, but also fitting right into the existing like comfortable workflows. Like Ivo works within Word because like lawyers review and redline agreements in Word, so it's like not requiring extra clunky steps, and it's making your existing workflows easier. I also think that like just getting buy-in from folks, and I think that that's part of the success of Ivo is that like a lawyer founded this company and now it is full of lawyers who are assisting with the sales processes and customer support, including myself. And having like sort of like the peer-to-peer interaction I think helps a lot because this is not like a humanless intervention. I think it requires human lawyers on both sides right now who are willing to put in a little bit of work to successfully adopt. But the outcome of that, and I think like the tangible impact is like really there, if users are willing to put in a little bit of that work up front. We always say, like we build playbooks and things like that, we always say like don't expect us to get it right on the first try, because some folks are like, wow, it did not work perfectly for me on run one, and for that reason I'm out. And that's not a helpful I think mindset to go into evaluating products and like looking at tools and assessing which might be right for your team. So I think it's definitely willingness to be open, and to embrace the shift, because it's sort of happening whether or not we like it. And it's good to know what's out there, and to feel like you're in control of that process.
Yeah. A few themes that have come up that I completely agree with. Like one, like you have to make it easier, like implementing technology that makes like or AI that makes the job harder. obviously is going to set you back. So having like a low change management approach, and that really starts with the vendors, right? Like thinking about which vendors are very cognizant of how to minimize the amount of change that's required, because often legal introducing new technology is asking a lot of either the lawyers or the rest of the business to change the way they've worked for potentially decades in particular organizations, right? But then also like this legal specific expertise is what you're talking about, like
Yeah.
infusing like an understanding of legal specific workflows, legal specific considerations like confidentiality and governance and the importance of accuracy that you may not sometimes get with more, let's call it horizontal or generic, maybe AI and enterprise tools. So I think legal, especially in today's world of AI, we tend to think that we have special needs, but we actually do. It turns out, and it's important to have like legal specifically designed tools to meet that as well, and that support.
Yeah,
Very
and
cool.
something I will just say, like something that I really do think like helps further along conversations and gives like our prospects and customers confidence in Ivo. Like I am our in-house counsel and I also use Ivo every day, basically as a customer. And so I can really speak to the utility of it and like a very like I have experience with the tool. I really like the tool. I've drank the Kool-Aid, obviously, but I think it's really excellent. And when I share with customers like the ways that I'm using it, and like we're sharing ideas with each other on how we're implementing it and seeing success with the tool, like I think that that's like a really like authentic process that I think only like further like allows teams to open up a little bit to the idea of adopting AI.
Yeah,
Wait,
awesome.
can I say something about adoption
Yeah.
too? Sorry.
Yeah.
I think to double tap a little bit on what Caitlin said about having an open mind, I think it's so important because I think, and I've used this analogy before, but like we can't expect AI to be perfect, right? And I think this is the concept of don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And I think it's so important to say that, especially because I know I've struggled with adoption of different AI tools. I know my team has as well, and others in my legal team. And the reality is, I think redlining is a really good example. If the three of us who all have legal experience, lawyers, redlined a document, none of us would redline exactly the same way, right? And so we can't expect AI to do it exactly the way that we would want. Maybe in the future, right? I'm not saying that that's not possible, but today that's not the reality. And so we have to also set our expectations appropriately. And I think that's
Mhm.
really important as you are looking at different AI tools, whether it's redlining or something else. None of us are perfect. Even if we go to outside counsel, they may give us guidance that isn't perfect or exactly right. And so this is where, it needs to be human in the loop, but we also have to like titrate our expectations to what the technology is truly capable of doing, and then making sure that we're doing our checks and balances along the way.
Hmm. I would also say like everyone is still learning how to make the most and work with
Mhm.
AI. And you always hear about that. Like I hear about this thing where it's like people think AI is growing, like the value of it is growing like this. This is actually how people are using it, which is like less than how much they think it's growing. But actually, what it can do is even more, like the curve is even more aggressive than that. And we're underutilizing this technology that we're all learning from. And I think a lot of the times, if we get outputs from AI that we may not be satisfied with, part of it, yes, might be technology developing, but part of it might be user error. It might be a learning experience and a training experience and a chance for us to actually collaborate with our peers and with vendors to actually learn more about how to be more AI literate and effective. So it's a journey. It's a journey, and it takes patience and an education mindset. I think Sarah in the chat asked a question around whether we've noticed trouble of AI recognizing red lines already implemented when reviewing agreements. That kind of is answered maybe possibly by the answer that we just gave, but do you have any additional color there, Caitlin or Jen, around AI struggling to recognize red lines?
Yeah, we have a way to isolate like just red lines that are like active track changes in documents. So we're sure that those are caught. But where there's not red lines, we also have like our like chat feature, which is our like agentic AI, and we're able to basically like provide it context. So providing templates or things like that, where AI can then assess like the actual deviations from the template. Like that's really the catch-all. And like the conversation with the assistant is really going to be the process for at least Ivo. Like that's how we capture it and identify any gaps against the template, even if they're not redlined.
Hmm. Cool. Let's talk a little bit about the architectural decisions that went into this, Jen, because I think there are so many tools right now in market, and I'm sure people on this call are being bombarded with all sorts of things that they can look at, and you can get demo fatigue at some point. It, like, how do you think about putting the right pieces of technology together to solve the problem that you have to minimize the amount of overlap between tools, but get the biggest breadth and best of breed in the capabilities that you need? Like, walk us through your thought process of like designing your tech stack.
Oh, Evan. It's I don't know if you want to get too much into my brain. I mean, I think it's a strategy, right? Because I think
Yeah.
you could buy you could have a tech stack of 50 different tools and solve your needs, right? But then you have to manage all that. And I think
Mm,
that's it's so challenging, right? And so part of it I think is really understanding the holistically what are all the problems kind of that you want to solve for and what's realistic for you to solve for with one tool versus maybe many. And then I think I go back to, okay, well, what's the data source for some of these and does that impact things, right? So if and I don't know if they're going to ask this later on, but I think, I'll talk specifically about our problem when it came to like intake of contracts specifically, right? And so
mm,
my approach to CLM is very different. I think it's catching on, and I shouldn't say it's mine. I'm sure somebody had this idea before I did, and I don't want to take credit for it. But I think when I think about CLM, very basically, I think about intake, review, and repository. And I have not seen a CLM tool that does all three of those parts really, really well. But I have seen intake tools that do it really well. I've seen review tools that do it really well. And I've seen repository that does it really well. And I think we're to a point in our technology world where you can tie those things together fairly easily. 5 years ago, absolutely not. I think getting an API was such a challenge. And now it feels like if I ask my IT team for this, they're like, sure. And do you want it by 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock? Right. I think it's changed a lot. And so for me, it was kind of an easy decision for me to say, okay, I need an intake tool, but I need an intake tool with document generation. So that was like my first need was I wanted something that had the ability to take in the requests, but then also could to create documents, meaning my templates, right? So based upon the inputs, I'm creating a document that automatically goes to my team. And then obviously for review, we chose Ivo. And so the great thing about Ivo is I don't have to integrate it with anything. It's just built into Word. And so I talk a lot about when I talk about technology, meet users where they are. And so my lawyers already are working in Word. And so they open up that document that they get from the checkbox workflow and it's in Word. They get to do it. They upload it back to checkbox to send it for signature and it's done, right? It's off their plate. I think the other part of that was when I was looking for an intake tool, I also needed something that would meet my users where they are on the sales end. And so the cool thing is that my sales team, maybe they know that we're using checkbox, but they probably don't because their motion is in Salesforce. And guess what? That's where it still is. And so we didn't change too much. I think to your point about light change management, we really didn't change. They still go into Salesforce to request an agreement. But what they have to input and what happens after that is so much more streamlined and they have visibility into it, which they didn't get in Salesforce, right? And so it really like that was the big problem that I was trying to solve. And then once we brought Checkbox on board, and even during the demos, we were like seeing the art of the possible. Well, if we're going to use Checkbox for legal intake for commercial contracts, why can't we use it for other things, right? And so I think I talked about COI, so we're using it for COI. We're using it. We're building out DSARs, right? So data subject access requests. Those are going to be coming in through Checkbox. The other things that we've rolled out, and this is more contract based, but it's interesting because as my commercial team has reminded me, it doesn't help them a lot. But we also automated our direct reseller agreements, which we've made it pretty much like no touch. Legal wasn't really touching them anyway, but our partner ops team was. But my favorite one that we've done, honestly, is our letters of authorization. For those of you who have a partner organization, and when you have resellers, sometimes they need a letter of authorization to say, yep, I'm an authorized reseller of Elastic. That was an incredibly manual process for no good reason, right? But there also needs to be due diligence and checks and balances because you need to make sure your resellers are selling to somebody that they can, that they've done the proper like due diligence, trade compliance checks, all of those things. Well, all of that data we have that they've done that in Salesforce. And so we're able to essentially let the request come in, pull that data in to Checkbox to say, are all these due diligence checks done? And if so, then create the LOA and send it directly to the reseller. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, but you're done, right? And so I think that's what's really cool about kind of how we approach this. We were really looking at it from a CLM solution of intake, and then we're able to look at it at a broader legal front door intake, which I think the world is our oyster, and we'll continue to build and continue to identify more use cases. And I would say continue to iterate and make these even more powerful, right? I think right now it is a little bit form based, and we're moving towards how do we use AI to really enhance that, because that's the future, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I think you can safely, until someone disputes you, you can safely claim that this modular CLM is maybe
Yeah.
something that you put out in market. Because you and I were talking about this like ages ago, and we're like, I wonder if this hypothetical situation could work in practice, and it's come to fruition. So until someone comes out and says, actually, you can take the medal for it. But so you start out with the CLM. You're trying to solve for CLM, you thought of a modular approach, and then you almost built from there, from the starting point, in two directions. That is, you started with the intake part of contracting and the generation of the documents, and then you branched out to more generic use cases like the conflict of interest. You said COI, conflict of interest, and these other data request subject use cases. And then you're also going deeper on the CLM pathway, and that's how you kind of started to work with Ivo as well. You kind of worked from intake to review, and then now repository. Um, as you think about like and this is one of the questions actually from Janine Moran from Hitachi. Hi, Janine. She asked a question. She said, "How is Ivo integrated into the checkbox workflow?" Can you walk us through like as you talk about from like how do you hand over from one system to the next? What is Checkbox doing versus what is Ivo doing? Like help the audience understand that a bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, from a technology standpoint, right, they're not integrated, which I think is the beauty of it, if I'm being completely honest, because they don't need to be. And
Mm.
so it's one to implement IVO is 30 seconds, right? It doesn't take much. But I think from a workflow standpoint, right, the request comes into Checkbox, and with the request, the document with the template, right, whatever it's an NDA, an MCA, whatever it is there. And you just double click on it because it's a Word document, and it automatically opens into Word. And then IVO is on your right hand side for our attorneys to start using. It's been trained on our playbooks, and our attorneys can start using it. I think and I'm just going to say this out loud because then maybe it will come to fruition. Where I'm really excited about a possible, even more, I would say, concrete checkbox IVO integration would be, NDAs to me are low risk, right? And so when can we get to a point where if my customer wants to upload their customer paper, and then it automatically goes into like an IVO workflow where IVO reviews it based upon our playbook, and it says, you know what? The risk of this is less than 80% or whatever our threshold is. Instead of us looking at it, it just automatically sends it for signature, right? Like to me, like that's where, and hopefully by the end of the year, I think in talking to both of your teams, I think that's a reality, right? But I think
Mm.
this is where we need to identify what are the low risk opportunities where we can have some agentic AI that does that. And I think NDAs is a really good example, because I
Mm.
guess I don't know the statistic, but I'm going to ask, like, in the world of NDAs, how many times have we litigated an NDA, right? Like a breach of an NDA? Very little is my guess. Less than 10% at the most,
Way
right? And
less.
so,
Yeah.
right? And so like that's a really good one. Like why are our teams ever looking at an NDA?
Mm.
I think, right? Like, is there value in that? And if so, what is the value? Can we articulate it? I don't know if we can.
Mm. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So you're thinking about so checkbox acts as your workflow, your logic engine. It determines what gets to review versus just automatic, self-service. If it hits
Mhm.
Ivo, what you're saying is that Ivo actually does the risk score analysis, and then even automates, perhaps pops it back into the workflow piece to drive it to the next step without, and then it only bubbles the things that actually do require human review. Like I think the point here is not to completely remove the human from the
Yep.
process, but rather just reserve the humans for the things that actually require, high risk, high judgment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Very
And
cool.
then once IVO pops it back into Checkbox, it goes up for signature. When it comes back into signature and Checkbox, it automatically uploads to our repository, right? And so
Positive.
it's
Exactly.
end to end, right? And so that now you've built your CLM and you have all that process. And I mean, it sounds simple in theory, in many ways, I think it really is, right? When we think about it, I think it's and the reality is that IVO has our playbooks. They know what we're comfortable with. They know what our fallback clauses are. And so
Mm.
the data is there to be able to do that. I think, obviously I'm not an engineer. The architects will figure out, how to put this all together. But I think there's real value in that. And I think that's one example. I think there's probably a lot more that other people are thinking about that I would love to hear about if you have ideas.
Yeah, I mean, Caitlin, I've got a question for you. You're legal
Yeah.
counsel yourself, and I think a lot of the times as we adopt these tools, lawyers are thinking, well, like where does the tools fit in? Where do I fit in? Like, how does AI and automation platforms work together with the human? Like, what's your take on all of this? And like, how do you see, I guess, customers that only have IVO versus Checkbox and IVO? Like, how does it look differently for them as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, that's what's nice about like being sort of like a targeted solution right now. Like we address like specific problems around contracting and like we're not looking to overhaul all of your processes. And especially like some of our customers who are like more resistant to adoption of AI, but they're kind of being forced to evaluate it. Like they probably would not want to walk into a company tomorrow that has sweeping changes and everything's automated. So it's nice because it allows them to have this like more like discrete like experience with AI and getting comfortable with integrating that into their workflows. And now we have two products, and the two products also speak to each other, which is really great to inform like how you're reviewing agreements. And those sorts of things like sort of to our earlier discussion, like just fitting into existing workflows and making life like easier is ultimately the point, and not wanting to scare away folks from adopting AI because they think it's going to require an entire overhaul of all the technology and the solutions that they have. So right now, like that's like one of our like biggest, I think, initiatives is like finding ways to like integrate and to build out those integrations with different tools. And if we're speaking with customers like that have a tool that they're already using and we don't have an integration built out, like we will build that. And that's what's cool about working at a startup where the engineers sit 10 feet away from the lawyers. Like I'm just constantly pestering them with things that I'm hearing and things that are bothering me. And so I think like having like a very like structured way for adopting tools is really helpful, and being clear on like what the solution is targeted to address. I think that basically allows you to like silo where AI like is needed most in like the current situation, and then from there you can really expand out, and like maybe that's when you adopt like look at IVO intelligence, the repository product, things like that. Like I think just getting in the door and showing how it can be successful and fit into their stack is really important, and that's really the first step.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Jen, like, let's talk a little bit about maybe like the metrics or some of the indicators of success of this approach. I think there's, by the way, in the chat, a tremendous amount of support from a lot of the people tuning in today around the modular approach. But like, what were some of the first signs for you that this was working? I know, I hosted one of these a couple of months ago, and there was a group that was particularly interested in how to get their sales teams to use the company paper over constantly accepting third-party paper. And I remember you told me that you had an unexpected switch around of that. So it's a bit of a leading question. It just popped into my mind. There's people that I owe an answer to, so you're going to help me answer that question for them.
Oh, the
How do
pressure.
you yeah. How do you
Yeah.
think about that? Like, how do you incentivize sales teams to flip the first paper, third paper mix to the first paper mix? And then I'll follow up with my question as originally thought.
Yeah, I don't think it's an easy answer because I think there's a lot of things that play into it. But I think one is your your NDA has to be a mutual NDA, right? And give them all the same things that you're asking for. Like It's got to be mutual. It has to be simple and basic, right? I think that's the first thing. But
Mm.
I think in many ways, like our change in this was we made it so simple for them to sign our NDA that it was kind of like, well, why wouldn't I? Why would I sit for how many ever emails or phone calls back and forth to negotiate things that, again, don't think really matter, right? And so I think that goes. So let me, I guess, talk a little bit more about our NDA, our flow, right? So
Mm.
when an AE comes into Salesforce, they go to either an account or an opportunity. It doesn't matter to us because we've built it out both ways, which I think is also a big deal. But and we have to, because for PubSec you need to have an opportunity, but for everything else you don't need to. And so there was some caveats that we had to take forward there. But they put in some basic information, and then an email automatically from Checkbox goes to the customer and it says, hey, we want to sign an NDA with you. We want to build this relationship. You have 4 options. You can sign our NDA as is. Here it is. Take a peek at it. Do you like it? Great. Sign it. Here's our NDA, but here's 5 or 6 areas where we don't really, it's not that we don't care, but we're okay, right? So if you want to say change jurisdiction, you want to change the term of the confidentiality, you can change that. And there's drop downs. So you can choose from a predefined list that we said, whatever ones you choose, we're still going to be okay with it because, again, it's low risk. And then option 3, I think, is for them to just redline our agreement. And then option 4 is to send us their party or their paper. And I think in that we say, like, this will take 8 years to finish if you send us your paper, right? We give some funny language around, like, but do you really want to do this?
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, like, approaching it with a little bit of humor, I try to take all things and approach them with humor a little bit because I feel like it just helps. And because it makes
Mm.
me a little less uncomfortable, maybe. But I think having that approach was helpful, right? And so if we look at our metrics and like when people are choosing option 1 and 2, it's pretty impressive, right? And so I think, I think where you're leading at is like, what is our metrics, right? And so we went
Mm.
so from a very manual process, it took us on average 23 days to get an NDA done. And I know that's like, how does it take 23 days? But some of that, what we learned and we looked at, like, the data, the underlying data of that is, it took us sometimes just 20 days to go back and forth arguing whose paper we were going to use. Like, that sounds ridiculous, right? So
Yeah.
having that discussion or having that, it's part of the workflow. They just get to decide. And we've made that choice that maybe we'll see
Mm.
more customer paper at some points in the workflow, and maybe we'll see more of our paper, but we were willing to take that risk, and it has turned out to be good. So we went from 23 days to 3 days on average. And that's across
Wow.
all of our workflows, which is huge, right? And I think it's very customer forward, but it also allows us to reduce the amount of time that we're spending on these. And then I think, the other thing that is part of that is we're using Ivo to help us redline those agreements. And so there's also efficiencies there. I think that's a little bit harder to measure, if I'm being honest. Like, we don't have a specific metric for that. But overall, right, from 23 days to 3 days. And some of that's sitting time, right? But it's still sitting there. You're not selling anything if you don't have an NDA. So it's doesn't matter if it's sitting or not. The fact is it's not done. And so now we're in 3 days, on average, we're getting our NDAs done. There's always outliers, right? And those are for the outliers.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, as you say, it's time to agreement. How
Yeah.
much of that is active time spent with lawyers? But ultimately, your sales teams probably don't care. They just want the thing done quickly so they can shorten their sales cycles and make more revenue for the business.
Yeah, and I think about that, Evan, like, even from like an AI perspective, right? Is where we're going with AI. I think about it as time spent versus outcome, right?
Mm.
And so think about that in the outside counsel sense. I think in a couple of years, we're not going to be talking about hourly rates or time spent on something. We're going to say, well, what was the outcome that you gave me, right? And so in
Mm.
some ways, we're doing that already with our contracting and with our workflows. And I think it's just going to be exacerbated as AI gets more and more prevalent and we build it into our workflows. And, I worked firm side for a while. I get, like, it's a huge culture shift, but I think we're going to get there. We have to worry about the outcome less than we
Mm.
have to worry about all of the other things.
Yeah. What I actually really enjoy about the example you gave as well is the outcome here isn't just, as you say, an efficiency play. It's not just how much time we're saving. Yes, there is definitely time saved, but it's actually also a velocity play, which actually tends to resonate a lot more with business leaders, right? If you tell them that
Mhm.
you're moving like you're shortening time to revenue, velocity of revenue as a legal department, like suddenly now that metric is something that they resonate with. So,
Absolutely. I mean, just to throw some more metrics out there, because I think you're exactly right. Right. So when I talked about our letters of authorization before,
mm,
if a reseller does not have an LOA, they can't close a deal. Right. Simple as that. And so in the past, we had deals held up at the end of quarter because there wasn't an LOA. It used to take us 2 days manual to get an LOA done. It takes us 2 minutes now. So there's nothing really that holds up a deal at the end of the quarter, because if you can get an LOA in 2 minutes, even if it's 11:50 on the night of close, you probably can still get that agreement signed by 11:59, right?
yeah,
And so I
right.
think your point to the velocity, and it is something that speaks to our sales leaders. Um, and again, it shows legal as a partner, right? We're not only solving
Mm.
legal's problems, we're solving the sales ops problems as well, or not challenges, right? They're not problems; they're opportunities for us to continue to do better.
Yeah. So for those friends who joined us on a previous webinar and were very curious about how do you get your sales teams to adopt your primary paper and these legal processes, the answer actually is make their lives easier. Just
Yeah.
deliver a process that actually helps them with their metrics, which is getting to revenue quicker and making that easy for the counterparty actually as well to come to the table. Because it's not actually just about the internal teams. You're making a better experience for the counterparties who, when you put yourself in their shoes, they don't want to dragged out long 23-day negotiation for NDAs. Like they also want to get to agreement as well, whether it's buying or
Yeah.
selling something, right? So it makes a lot of sense. Okay. Uh, Caitlin, let me ask you a question around like specifically the AI piece, which is obviously your expertise here. Um, Jen shared a lot of the efficiencies that come with the workflow, like just how work moves along and where you kind of fall into using your paper versus third-party paper. If we drill down into the review piece, where have you seen the most success in applying like the Ivo AI technology for contract review? Like, talk a little bit about where it does really well and maybe some areas that, in comparison, maybe aren't there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like to Jen's like conversation around like this will take 7 days or 70 of something if you use counterparty paper, like that is like the great fear and the thing that does end up taking a lot of time. And so Ivo like
Mhm.
specifically addresses that. Like we always say, like you know your paper, it's pretty easy to review red lines of your paper. You sort of get the same things most times. And that is a much quicker process. So there's only so much time you can really save with reviewing red lines of your paper. Whereas the big time saving potential really does come with counterparty paper. And the intake process, at least for like what an Ivo playbook looks like, is like it is a very interactive process. It is like me, the attorney, who's going to be building the playbook and understanding exactly how you contract, gathering materials of like all sorts that really do a good job representing your legal positions, and then memorializing that in a playbook that you then use to run against your current agreement that you're negotiating. And when you have this like compilation of standards, like it at least like for me, like some of the benefit I see is like it takes this like institutional knowledge and like, oh, I know that we'll agree to this one thing sometimes, that just lives in your head, and if you leave the organization that leaves with you. So it really allows everyone in the organization to really benefit and like standardize what the output looks like. And like I think like reducing amount of hours spent negotiating an NDA is like a great indicator of success. But I also think like we see a lot of like, if someone brand new joins the organization, like how long would it take them to otherwise have to ramp up to understanding the company's standards? How much would they need to escalate? With Ivo, when you're already working within your company's legal standards that have been vetted, there's not that time. So I think it ends up saving a lot of time in that respect. And it also allows like non-lawyers to be part of that contracting process, to maybe participate in those like initial reviews and things like that when you know you're working within your vetted standards. And I also think like just number of turns, of course, always is a good indicator. And Ivo does a good job, like, and I by Ivo I sort of mean me and my team as well, because ultimately we are the ones building your playbook. It's not AI building it. And if you're telling us that like you will agree to something on occasion, like that's built into the solution. And so folks can have that context without ever needing to like go up the chain to ask whoever busy executive has to generally approve it, we know it's already vetted. So I think that those are like other ways to see like time savings and benefit of incorporating AI. And I think like the more like thoughtful the process, and like this is what our team does. And so we now know really what it takes to build a good playbook and what it takes to get a good output.
Mm.
And we are like very much there to sort of handhold the process as much as customers want us to, because we know it works. And having that like human element again is always going to be a little bit different from just putting a bunch of documents into AI and expecting the same result.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to the expertise and understanding legal as a provider, right?
Yeah.
Like really infusing that in. Um, Early in this conversation, someone in the chat, Janice, said that we posed the $1 million question. The next thing I'm going to pose is maybe the $2 million question then, which is to Jen. As you think about, like, obviously you've chosen Ivo and Checkbox to be part of your tech stack, but if you take a step back and things are changing so quickly, and it's all about the right technology fit for the right organization, the culture, your maturity and all that kind of stuff, right? We would love for it to be Ivo and Checkbox, but it may not always be the case. So, like, Jen, what would be your advice to people who are today, again, flurried with different options? Now that they understand from you the playbook of, okay, let's think about this in a modular way. Let's connect like an intake tool and a generation tool with a review tool in this way. Like, how do they then decide or evaluate AI tools?
Such a good question. I mean, I feel like, again, I think I said this as part of my intro, but I think working for Elastic, data is always on the top of my mind. But I think what I'm hyper aware of when I look at AI tools is realizing that AI is only as good as the data that it's grounded in. And so is that my data? Is that somebody else's data? What is the data, right? And so I think data integrity in architecture, right? So what is the underlying data? And I want to look past the interface, the bright shiny tool, right? Is it just a wrapper over some rag augmented, skin that's scraping the web, right? Because that's not great, and I'm actually probably going to see some hallucinations from that, and I'm not going to get the best output, especially in legal. I think there are use cases where a wrapper and rag is fine. Um, but I really want to know, like, what is it training on? What is it processing on? And ideally, it's primary legal data, or my data. But I really want to understand where does it come from? How is the AI giving me the answers? But then beyond that, I think it's important in legal, and Evan, I think you even said this at the beginning, is we feel like we're special, and we are. I think
Mm,
in legal there is fit for purpose tools versus
mm,
general LLMs, right? And so we at Elastic are a Google shop, so we have access to Gemini and Notebook LM, and I think those are amazing generalist tools. And I think generalist, but also can have legal use cases, right? So I think for drafting, I think Gemini actually does a pretty good job. I think Notebook LM does a great job for even like going through a lot of legal data. But then, like, what are your fit for purpose AI tools, right? Or what are your use cases? What my commercial teams from a redlining standpoint is very different than my employment team needs from a legal research standpoint. And so I shouldn't be looking at necessarily a general tool for all of my team's use cases, right? My commercial team and my corporate team, very different use cases, very different work that they do. And so I think you need to look at, again, data, and then you look at what is the fit for purpose. But then the third thing that I think is really important, I would say not only in AI tools, but in technology vendors in general, is the partnership test, right? And I think this is really important to me. And I've used this story before, but what I really don't want is 6 months down the road, or 1 month or a year down the road, where we're implementing something and it's not working and it's failing. And I say, I'm going to kill this and I want to start over, or I'm going to move on to a different vendor. And then for that vendor that I was working with to say, yeah, I saw those red flags 6 months ago and I just didn't know how to tell you. Oh my God, please don't. Right. And so I think I want to identify a partner that's going to listen. Are they hearing what I'm saying and not just what they think I'm saying? Right, about their roadmap, but also, are they honest about what I'm trying to do? I don't have all the answers. I am not perfect. They've seen their tool implemented by many different customers. I want to know, like, what has worked for somebody else, or Jen, you're off the rails. Like that's a really bad idea, or they'll help me work through it, right? I want to partner with our vendors. And I think in the world of AI, that's even more important. Can they be my collaborative partner? And can we have a transparent relationship where I can say, hey, I didn't love the way that you showed up, or they can say, hey, I hopped on a call with somebody in your team and I didn't love the way they showed up. Whatever that is, I want to have that relationship because I think it allows for growth. I think it allows for better adoption, right? And so I think all of those things, I would say the data, the fit for purpose, and then really it's a strategic relationship is what you're building.
Mm. Mm, absolutely. The last point around the strategic relationship goes back to the point that we're all on a journey and we're all iterating. And so being able to do that together as a team, as an extension of your team, not just as a technology, right? But really bringing on the vendor as a partner is so critical. It was always critical, even more so now with how fast technology is evolving. Janice from the audience asks a very practical question for you, maybe Jen, best for you to answer. For teams that are running lean, what does implementation realistically require in terms of time and internal resources with this type of tech stack? How do you stand this up without disrupting day-to-day legal work? Such a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think the typical lawyer answer, and I think I even have a sticker on my water bottle. It says it depends, right? But it really does. I mean, I think it depends upon what is the workflow that you're building, right? I think the great thing about Checkbox is it is no code, right? You don't have to have an engineer or developer to build it. And so I think from that standpoint, it's not going to be as much as it would be if you didn't. And I think it depends on your process, right? I think there's some things that you could build in a checkbox in 24 hours. I think it just depends. And so I know that's a really cop-out answer, but it really depends. And I think this is where you need to, if you are lean, like figure out what's the first workflow you can build that saves time to then create the time to build more, right? And I think if you do that, you might be able to also show the value proposition of adding somebody in your team, right? Because you might, through that process, be saving somebody else so much time that it makes sense for you to have another headcount to then build more. And I think, Evan, you asked me this question on a different webinar, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but like, where do we see like the legal team looking like in a couple of years? And I think we will see a bigger legal ops team, because we're going to have to build the bots, the agentic flows and all of that. And there will be lawyers who move into legal ops roles, but I think the legal ops teams will actually become a little bit bigger. And I think the attorney headcount will decrease a little bit, because to create those automations, you have to do some building. That's just the reality of it, whether it's vibe coding or whether it's building boxes in Checkbox, right? And I think just on the IVO side, right, I think the implementation is really, I mean, for us, we had to have SSO. So it was getting Okta set up. And then beyond that, it was just making sure that the word added worked for the licensed users that we identified.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point. Like when you pick your tech stack as well, making sure that it's something that you can have some velocity and control over if you're lean, right? Because not every legal team, in fact, most legal teams don't have, a representation from IT or get to sit at the top of the IT queue. So as you pick your tooling as well, really important if you are lean and you want some velocity and you want some quick wins, to find tools that you can truly like use yourself within the department, to own that yourself. I come to realize that not all tools are actually in that bucket, and sometimes you have to go back to the vendor, or you have these implementation partners that are quite heavy to work with. But if you're lean, there's probably specific tools that are better fit for you as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mindful of time, by the way, thanks for all the great questions and the conversation. Maybe to summarize here for everyone who's been tuning in, we promised you a playbook. So let me try and summarize what we've discussed here. So as we bring together AI and workflow together, really it's the idea that imagine anyone in your business needs legal help. They come through, Salesforce, if it's a commercial team, maybe you're a Slack house, maybe it's email. I think the common theme of what we've discussed is how do we keep change management as low as possible, because tech implementation is hard already. So how do we meet the business where they are? As the request comes through the intake, we figure out, well, what type of request is this? And this is where AI now is increasingly playing a very critical role in categorizing requests from just conversations. I think we were talking about, Jen, shifting from form-based experiences to more conversational contexts. Sometimes it's non-contracting, but sometimes it is. So you can like I'm a very visual thinker, you can tell, right? Like hopefully you're following me on this like this mind map of the request comes in, branches out, different types of requests. If it goes down the contracting pathway, can we solve it with our party, like first party paper first? And then Jen had those kind of four options that we talked about, like just sign it, it'll be quick, make some pre-approved changes, uh, redline the version that we have, or upload your own copy, right? And you get that kind of really quick self-service, reduce the 23 days down to how many? 3 days? 3 days, yeah, 3 days. And then if you hit the option of review contracts or it's a third party paper, then you kick off something like Ivo, and then that's going to make your legal team more productive. And then ultimately, it all connects back at the end of the day through the workflow into your repository so you can get all the contract analytics. And then, of course, there's a wrapper of the reporting around everything so that even outside of the contracting bubble, you have reporting across everything. So you can justify headcount and legal impact and ask for additional resources. And so it's really, I kind of say there's 2 points of value. Either you're reducing the amount of work that even hits the legal team because you're actually sending the right work to the right place, whether it's AI tools or self-service tools, or maybe it's an HR question, not for legal, but you're effectively taking maybe 1,000 requests down to 200. And then for the 200, you're basically using tools like Ivo and enabling the productivity as opposed to the workflow, but the productivity of the lawyers to be whatever percent more productive. And so you're tackling it at both ends. That's kind of my summary of this conversation. I don't know if I've reflected that well, Jen or Caitlin. Is there anything you want to add to my summary there?
Yeah.
No, but I want AI to listen to your summary and create the image that would go with
Yeah,
it so we can really
Yeah.
visualize it.
it's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
Um, I think for me, like the biggest, and it's been really helpful actually to hear, Jen, the way that like you all have developed your tech stack and the way that Checkbox fits into it, and Ivo and the way that you envision that looking in the future. I think that that's super interesting. I think like for me, like what I've heard is like we all are in like a specialized field. Again, like we think we're special and we're not, but the work we do is sometimes is specialized and does require like an added layer that generic tools are just not going to fit. And I think like being really intentional about like the solutions that you need to address your current needs, and being really strategic and choosing a partner. Like Jen and I were at a dinner like a month ago, and it was great. And so like those sorts of partnerships and relationships I think are super important, and you don't want to feel like siloed from the product and your input. And so I think it's really important to be strategic with the partners that you choose. And I think especially like in the legal profession, I continue to say it, I am a broken record, but I think like having that human element still is necessary. I just think that the AI has not yet done away with the need for us. And so I will continue to do my job as long as I'm able. And I think like getting that buy-in early is important, and fitting into those existing workflows is essential. And learning like where to prioritize adoption. Like NDAs are a perfect example because they're high volume, and you want to be getting the most like you said velocity with the tool right out the gate. And so prioritizing where folks are going to like see the benefit immediately, then can enable you to like implement like more complex solutions down the line. But I think being able to just see and feel like the tangible effects and the ways that life has just been made easier by adopting these solutions, I think is like ultimately the goal, and like reducing friction in the time, and allowing attorneys to spend more time on strategic things than just reviewing NDAs, I think is ultimately
Hmm.
the goal.
I'm an
Can I give
optimist.
it
Oh, sorry.
can
Go
I give
ahead,
a
Jen.
30-second like practical advice on this? I,
Hmm.
I I think like if you're in legal ops or a GC and you're struggling to like how do you use AI, ask AI. Like ask AI, like
Hmm.
AI is a learning tool, right? And so I go to like I want to do this. Like how do I make my legal team function better? And I think we live in a society sometimes where it's embarrassing to ask dumb questions, right? We don't have to have that anymore because you literally can go to AI and just have a conversation. And I think it's so powerful. And you can do that without typing. I dictate to my AI all the time. And so if you're really struggling through this to build a playbook or to build an AI native charter about like how you soft mandate AI to your teams, have AI help you through that fits your culture and what you really want to see your teams do. I want to make sure there's some practical advice that people can take
Yeah,
away. And I think that's for me
totally.
is really important and what I do on a daily basis. AI is your coworker. It is not a hobby. Like make it part of your daily life.
Great ending tip there. And for everyone else, I also like to give some value to you all. So if you want to also get clarity on where Ivo and Checkbox works together, we actually put together this like two-pager. I'll send this out to those of you who might be interested. I don't know why my clicking isn't working. There we go. So it's going to show you kind of how the two things fit together and how that might compare to traditional CLM. So we'll go ahead and send that out as well after this webinar to the people who have attended. But thank you so much, Jen and Caitlin, for this conversation. Really appreciate it. Such an important topic. And thank you to everyone else who have dialed in here today. Have a great week ahead, and we'll see you on the next one.